Here's the evidence. Okay, now I want you to quickly flash back and forth between the previous slide and this one. Notice this part of the curve, okay, and the leveling out. We go to this is the real growth of the human population when the cap of carrying capacity has been removed. So for the longest period of time, humans survived at carrying capacity. In fact, we could draw this way back here, a flat line for 50,000 years. There were ups and downs as civilizations or local communities rose and fell, but for the most part, growth is not a persistent phenomenon in human or any K-strategist population. Then we found oil. And oil gave us access to everything else. More food, more resources of every kind to create the infrastructure we needed to sustain more and more people, and so more and more people came along. This explosion of human beings is unprecedented for any species, and certainly unprecedented for human beings. It's what we think of as normal. But look at the data. Only 8 generations of people have really experienced a consistent period of growth, sufficient so that they would notice it really in their lifetimes. Okay. Almost everything important about modern technology didn't exist when I was born. Certainly not that camera, or these computers or projectors or anything. Change is just inordinately fast today. It's a unique period in history. It's only been since the 1950s that any government on planet Earth has taken growth to be an important part of its economic platform. Do you realize that? Only since the 1950s has economic growth been the part of any official government economic platform. It took us, 5 or 6 generations to really figure out that we could use this. So the point I'm really getting at here is that what each of us in this room takes to be the norm, of course growth is normal, we need 3 or 4% just to keep the economy on its feet, is really the single most abnormal phenomenon in the history of our species. Now again, there have been other cultures that have risen or fallen, but the time dimensions are different and the scale is different. Well, up until, this is 2,000 years ago, there were less than 200 million people on the entire planet. And it had been that way for thousands of years and continues to be that way for almost 2,000 more years before this incredible explosion in just the last 150 years. So in the 20th century, we saw a 4-fold increase in human numbers in just 100 years alone. Completely unprecedented. And if you remember that this will always flatten out at some point, and then perhaps come down, which is what we want to avoid, it's inevitable. What goes up, even in population, must at some point come down. Now, just a couple of things. Some of you may yet be thinking, well, surely we don't use all resources. There's actually been studies of the history of human resource exploitation. One of the more famous ones was undertaken by 3 of my colleagues at UBC in the 90s. This is a quote from an article in Science. Although there's considerable variation in detail, there's remarkable consistency in the history of resource exploitation. Resources are inevitably overexploited, often to the point of collapse or extinction. That is a fact of human resource exploitation as our technology improves, and we will take the last one, unless powerfully restrained by international regulation or some other form of this is where federalism comes in at either the global or national. You need a basis in law to inhibit what humans would otherwise do naturally. Okay, so that's the history. Next. Here is a perfect example of non-response to science. This is not a short time period. From 1962 to 1992 is a 30-year period during which Canada had management responsibility for the world's largest fishery, a fishery that had sustained human fishing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we watched, over that period of time, the steady decline in the spawning stock biomass to the point where it collapsed in 1992. Now 18 years ago, we stopped fishing and the stock has not recovered. Now, the fish haven't disappeared, they haven't gone extinct, but the impact of human exploitation has so altered the ecosystem structure that the fish can no longer, as it were, exploit or retain the niche that they once occupied within that particular ecosystem. So it's not clear that that stock will ever recover without some other knock of some kind or other pushing them back into that original state. But this is a shameful example of ignoring the scientific data that something is awry here. I won't go into the details, but it was quite clear for many, many years before the collapse actually occurred. Well, a group of scientists compared human beings to 96 other species very similar to humans in their ecological requirements. And they measured a dozen different qualities or characteristics. And they found that in almost every case, humans were the outlier. So what this graph shows is a distribution of these 96 species according to their appropriation of biomass. So how much do these species eat, basically? And what it shows is a normal distribution, a log normal distribution actually. These are humans out here. So the other 95 species are over here. Human beings are way out here, 2 orders of magnitude more biomass extracted from our ecosystems than by the highest species. Well, this is the 95% confidence limits. So we're way, way out there eating a couple of hundred times more stuff than species at the 95th percentile out on the edge. So this is quite an astonishing mark of human competitive superiority on the one hand, but also a mark of our capacity to overexploit the ecosystems of which we are a part. Okay. Now, that's all biology. What has culture got to do with this? Because I'm often berated by sociologists and political scientists for underplaying the role of culture. Now look, there's a hell of a lot more sociologists and political scientists out there promoting culture, and there's very few biologists who are willing to stick their neck outs the way I am. So I don't apologize for trying to put the biological argument forward. But I want to now bring in the cultural and show that it actually reinforces the biological. So this is actually a combination of culture and biology. Humans are a myth-making species. Sociologists talk about the cultural narrative. Every culture has its narrative, its origin myth, its destination myth, and a whole lot of other mythic constructs that make us behave and so on and so forth. All right? So we need stories. In fact, it's the shared mythologies, the shared stories that make this group different from that group. And look at how this disrupts geopolitics. You've got the Muslim group of myths in conflict with the Christian group of myths. And these myths are extraordinarily powerful, enough to get people to go out and blow themselves up in support of their particular mythic construct. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone here, but the myths that we believe in are more powerful than even the survival instinct. That's how powerful the need for mythic constructs are in the human organism. And they are a very dominant force, or prevailing force, in geopolitics, even today. We, in the Western scientific tradition, are no less myth-bound than any other culture. In fact, I would argue that the notion that we are a science-based culture is our biggest cultural myth. It simply enables us to ignore the reality that we actually don't behave that way at all. And there's been lots written about this. I recommend a very readable, accessible little book by a theologian from Mount Allison University back east, Colin Grant, simply called Myths We Live By. It's a wonderful story about the human propensity for myth-making. Go on.